hope you can feel us, and you're definitely about to hang out with us.
I can't tell stories authentically without honoring my own.
What I thought was humility was me playing small.
Guilt and shame have no place in the human experience.
And so to not love myself is so disrespectful.
You're a person that can get there if you don't quit.
Every conversation we've had, I leave like better, you know?
I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I won't lie. There was the first few pages, right? There was a sentence that was said in the book. And I think it was, two daughters more perfect than their parents. What can be better than that? And I definitely put the book down. I was like, okay. I thought it was going to be another sentence, right? And then it was that sentence. And I was like, I don't want to read this. I'm not. And I like that you're laughing because that sentence, I felt your sarcasm in it. I felt the pressure in it. I felt and I'm going to do my best not to spoil the book too much, guys, but that sentence alone, I just felt like, yeah. So what comes to mind when I just brought that up?
I mean, I'm laughing because, I understand. It's, I knew that part of the project of setting up the book was setting up the ideology of this town, which is a really horrible ideology. Right. But, I think that people who believe in terrible things obviously don't think that they are terrible. Right. And, I had to kind of position you within the point of view of the people who come from this town who believe that this almost sort of genetic engineering that they are undertaking in their population is kind of the American dream, which is the idea that the children will be better than the parents in some way. But in this context, better just means lighter.
Exactly. And that was the crazy part about that better means a lot of different things depending on where you were raised, right? Like for I've heard that you said that your parents wanted you to be a lawyer when you were growing up. So better could have been you becoming a lawyer, right? Or the next best lawyer, the district attorney or something else. Better for me, I'm a Nigerian American. That could have definitely been being a physician, being a doctor, being a nurse, right? Like those things could have been better too. And so I think that's what struck me about that sentence, because better meant so many things. Like you said, in this town, it was lighter. In somebody else's town, it's being married before her mom was, or whatever. And so have you experienced those kind of things in your world in terms of what is better? Because obviously you did not become a lawyer. So what is like with your parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my parents were both the first generation college students. So for them, that was what better meant, was that they both went to college and their parents were unable to do so. And then for me, they wanted me to not have to struggle as much as they struggled. They both grew up pretty poor. So they didn't want me to have to struggle. And I think that's why they didn't want me to become a writer, because to them that meant, a life of being a starving artist. Yeah. So I think, I was frustrated at first when I would hear them try to talk me into going to law school, because I knew that I really did want to be a writer. At one point I realized that I don't remember where I heard this, but there was I saw this somewhere where someone was saying like, your parents want what they know is good for you. That's not necessarily what's best for you, but they want kind of that sure thing in their minds. Yes. And in my parents' minds, that was, you go get like a real job and get a real profession. So I think eventually I had to realize it was coming from this place of love and wanting the safety and security for me that they had to really fight for in their own lives. But at the same time, I had to eventually just kind of take a bet on myself and feel free to kind of, charter this path that no one in my family had ever gone down before.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful part of our evolution. I think at a certain age, we do think it's important to take our parents' advice so deeply. And then all of a sudden we develop this self-trust that is more powerful than what the people who have loved us and love us still tell us what to do. I definitely came to terms with, you guys do love me, even though you told me not to move to LA and don't do this and don't do that. It's just that you want me to be better and well off. So I think that's a really important point. And I think a lot of people experience that, especially, if they're trying to become creative and their parents were not, right? So yes. I want to talk about identity. That was a really beautiful theme in the book in a non-judgmental way. I didn't really feel like you were writing these characters in a judgmental way. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think judgmental writing is interesting writing. I don't like reading books when you can tell that the writer doesn't like their own characters. Right. To me, it's just like, why do you want me to spend time with these people that you don't even like? Is how I feel. So I didn't want to write these characters from a place of judgment. I knew that I was writing characters that were often making choices that would be offensive, that would anger readers, that would upset readers in some way. And I was mindful of that. But at the same time, I didn't want to justify or explain their actions. I just wanted to present what they were doing and have you understand from their perspective why they were making these decisions. And even if you don't agree with those decisions, you maybe will understand why they made the choices that they made.
Right. So if you didn't judge any of the characters, did any of the characters surprise you? Specifically, I'm asking about Stella. Like, did her decision to deny who she was, even after she was confronted by her daughter, did that surprise you?
I think, yeah. I think that there were a lot of moments during Stella's sort of journey that really surprised me. I knew that this would be a story that she would be the sister who passed, but that was kind of all I knew going into it. So kind of every step of the way, all of these choices that she's making, the way that she kind of almost fades into this life. It's not something that first she is really consciously trying to do. When she decides to pass, she's doing it for a job and she thinks that it's kind of a temporary thing, but eventually that becomes her whole life and that becomes the most real thing to her. And I think that section was something that was surprising to me, that could happen to a person and be able to sort of supplant your reality in a way. But I think later in the book, as you're talking about the way that she continues to kind of dig in her heels about it, a lot of it was thinking about what happens in real life when people are confronted after having constructed some type of a lie or false narrative. And there are some people who come clean and there are some people who will never admit that they did anything wrong ever. And those people are more interesting to me because I think I would like to believe I'm the type of person who would just be like, yeah, you got me, I lied. But the people who refuse to ever admit they're wrong, I think there's something so more fascinating about that psychology to me. And I wanted to try to understand why would she continue to dig in her heels and continue to sort of refuse to accept her daughter confronting her and other characters sort of realizing that she's been constructing this false narrative.
That's so painful because if you really do think about it in the relation to, people in your world or people who are more interesting, there's such a false sense of safety in sticking to the lie, right? And to watch Stella, but also in real life, to watch us all wrestle with changing our mind, right? Because it's just changing our mind. It's so simple, but really it feels like but everyone's going to know that I changed my mind. And I think that was what gave me so much compassion for her because I was like, yeah, wow, for her, she'd rather you guys not know. Like she thinks that's protecting her, even though you're like, this is actually really horrible. But, so I thought that was really interesting. What's your hierarchy of identity for yourself? Like, do you identify yourself first as a woman, as a Black woman, as a person from San Diego, as the youngest, as a writer? What's the hierarchy for you?
I guess I would say as a Black woman, I can't really separate those parts of myself in any type of ranking of, of race before gender, as people are always often and have for decades been contesting about those rankings. I think when I'm experiencing, moving through the world or reading things or reacting to things, I'm always thinking about it through the lenses of race and gender together, because that's always been my experience. So I think that is kind of my primary sort of form of identity. I think I have increasingly become more aware of my identity as a Californian, as I have not lived in California. And things that always felt to me very ubiquitous, I later realized were very specific to growing up in a beach town in California. Right. Like, yeah, everyone has surf PE, and people are like, no, everyone does not have surf PE in high school. I think that's something that I've also become increasingly.
That is, wow, grew up in Texas. Yes. So not.
There you go.
I love it.
Yes.
Good. Yeah. Was there any part of that reality as like being your, primary identity that has changed or expanded in the past 12 months for you?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to think about that sort of question of how I've seen myself and how it's changed over this past month. Because I have been trying to think about it. I think a lot of it for me is also just my relationship to work and career. I think a lot of us have been experiencing that during this pandemic because, prior to that, a lot of what I was doing was traveling and talking about my book. And I've still been, talking about my book on Zoom and everything. But the idea of thinking of myself as somebody who is on the go and feeling value from being able to do those types of things. And then that kind of receding, I think that that's something that I've had to confront, sort of what it means to me to be productive or what it means to me to be successful, or anything like that. Because, in a lot of ways, this has been the, wildest year of my career in addition to just personal life, but I've experienced all of it from inside my home. And I don't think I'll ever be able to truly wrap my mind around the dissonance of what that experience has been.
Wow, that's a really good point. So while success was happening technically outside and you're inside without the cheers or the people or the massive hugs, did that change the way you saw success in a way? Or is that still something you're kind of grappling with?
I think both. I mean, there's one side of it. I think for me, a lot of it was as it became increasingly aware to me that there would be no book tour, that there would be, at this point in which I'm realizing it, I think it was probably early on, maybe like April, I had a conversation with my editor and, because at first everyone's like, yeah, we'll be in lockdown for, it'll be a few weeks. And obviously
you in May.
Exactly. And I was in New York at the time, so I quickly knew that was not going to be true, but, realized there was not going to be a book tour. And I think at first I did feel a sense of sadness and grief surrounding that, because so much of writing a book is something that you do alone. And the moment where you actually get to be kind of among people is the book tour. And I was looking forward to, going, traveling, seeing friends and family in all these places where I was going, and all the kind of fanfare of publishing a book. That's like the one moment where you kind of have some type of community, as a writer. So I was looking forward to that. And I think there was a lot of sadness kind of surrounding that often felt very silly, compared to everything else that was happening around me. But I did feel, that type of sadness. But on the flip side of it, there were also so many ways I felt like the people around me and my friends and family found ways to celebrate with me, even though they could not be around me physically. I was sent so many bottles of champagne via Drizzly. I've sent so many flowers. I had people calling me and FaceTiming me and all of that. So I think it did cause me to reevaluate what that looks like, but it made me so grateful for the people truly in my inner circle who still found lots of ways to be supportive and to help me through what was just the craziest time in my life, even though they couldn't be with me physically.
I'm so grateful for them too, because that creativity and the passion and the their need to make sure you felt seen while still being far is amazing. I'm really grateful that you had them in your life as well. And I wonder, did that experience of hugs without hugs change what you see in the future or what you might need, just like as a human, that satisfaction of the fans or friends? Or do you think when your next book comes out or that next beautiful thing that we want to celebrate on a large scale, do you think you'll need the same things you did before? Or are you looking forward to kind of getting back to a normal version of celebration, or are some parts of the normal you experienced that you want to take with you? Like, is sending flowers now going to be the thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because, there's one thing that I've wanted to take away from it is just like, and always have wanted to be mindful of this, is just like, you can't place like too much value in external praise.
Yeah.
And I think that's like true of life in general, but especially true of a creative life, because it's all subjective. You can't control the reviews. You can't control what readers write about you on Amazon. You can't control, what people tag you in on Instagram to tell you that they hate your book. You can't control that. So I never want to be the type of person who has to live for applause or anything like that. But at the same time, I am, looking forward to, have agreed to some in-person events for later in the year or next year. So I am looking forward to being able to do these types of events and actually meet readers and sign books. I haven't signed books for anybody for the Vanishing app. So I am looking forward to doing those things. And I think also, for me, the other takeaway was just like, as trite as it sounds, like in spite of all these sort of crazy career things that were happening, like when I think about that moment, the pandemic, I remember like when my friends, surprised me with a Zoom birthday party when I turned 30 and like sent, massive amounts of alcohol to my apartment and all popped up on Zoom to surprise me. Like those are the types of things I think that really that really meant something to me, because I was just like thinking to myself like, oh yeah, I'm going to celebrate this birthday alone in my apartment. Like, this is how I'm going to turn 30. And that wasn't the case. So things like that, I think, are the moments that really stood out for me and reminded me, I think, what I value most.
That's amazing. And they take us further than the things that, were quote unquote normal. And I think that's really, really amazing. But I do hope you get to sign several thousands of books in the future. So that'll be really amazing. Again, I'm trying not to spoil things, readers and listeners. So please make sure that you do check out the book. But I am going to bring up a theme that I thought was really important in terms of performance. As a writer, in a sense, you are performing. As a TV host, as a journalist, as whatever, performing. I saw the versions of race performance with Stella, obviously with Desiree, performing motherhood with Adele. Like, there were so many performances going on in one book. And I was like, this is really interesting. Are we always performing? Like, I was really sitting there in inspection of that. And I wonder for you, is there a place or a time that you feel like you're performing, and where is that, and what's happening that you put it down?
Yeah. I mean, I think frequently, if not always,
that's so honest.
I mean, I think there's, the obvious stuff of like when we're working, and as you said, as a writer, I do think that there is performance that happens both on the page in a weird sense. I find that that's kind of what I love about writing fiction, is the idea of being able to kind of throw your voice and to sound like somebody else, or to sort of, inhabit the consciousness of someone so completely different than you. There is a type of performance to that. But like, acting or these other types of performances, it often speaks to something that's very true, even though it's on its face false. So that's, I think, what I love about on the page. And then obviously, like off the page, the idea of, going on a book tour or having to do an interview or something, there's an element of that is also performing, where there is, again, some kind of veneer of falsity to, how the stories that we tell about ourselves. I think that was the strangest thing about publishing a book, and realizing that I had to have a coherent story about myself to present, because I had never thought of myself as having any type of a coherent life narrative. And I still don't think of myself as doing that, but realizing that there is some way that you have to kind of translate yourself to somebody else, and someone who's not like a friend or someone that who gets to know you gradually over time as we get to know people, but needing to kind of have like a package to give to people about yourself. And, that was something that I had to kind of learn how to do, and it did not come naturally to me. So I think there are a lot of elements of that, that are true of my life. But then more broadly, as you said, I was interested in these ideas of performing roles and races, and all of these ways that these characters are having to kind of adapt and learn these new scripts for the roles that they're trying to play.
That is so good. In 45 minutes, you and I are going to get to spend some time together. We're both giving each other a package. Hey, this is Stace. Hey, this is Brit. Get to know me, blah, 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 hug it out. And then leave. And it's like, wow, that's the truth, right? And I wonder, how does that affect your relationships when you are meeting people gradually over time? Or because that understanding to me, when I have a friend and I'm watching them in a moment of like technically performance, I'm like, hey, you don't have to do that. Take a second. Yeah. It's all good. And they're like, oh, what are you doing? Reading my soul. I'm like, not trying to read your soul, just letting you know you can be a person, like it's a scary thing. And you never want to make someone feel like they have to break it. But that question to me, that theme was just so clear and deep, in my opinion, because performance, I think even the year we went through together. Now everyone's leaving with we don't know how everyone decided to evolve or not evolve in a year together, right? So like now we're all going to join out in the street and do what? Like hang out like
I know. Weird. It is weird. That's one of the things that I'm nervous about, is just like, I know everyone's like joking about how we're all like emerging from our various caves as like these feral, creatures. But I also am just like, I don't remember the last time I've really met a new person and been able to be real, and not in like a professional capacity of we're sitting on Zoom in this, very unrealistic environment that would be different even if we were like face to face or like sitting having coffee or something, But I do have some anxiety about that because I know that I have experienced a lot of change in this year, and a lot of people have. And just the idea of meeting a new person and feeling like you don't have to translate yourself, or you don't have to present a package, that you can just sort of be a person. That's the opposite of what I've been doing this past year on Zoom, and what I think a lot of us have been doing.
Absolutely. Okay. So do you mind you and I having like a superhuman human moment, sharing something that was breaking for both of us, that you don't have to translate to me? You just, what's something that for you was like, okay, what the hell's going on? Like within
what?
I was going to say within the past 12 months, but it could have been yesterday. I mean, it could have been, we are still in the moment. I also want to share, I have some anxiety about that as well. I'm a huge who's trying to figure out, like, I don't want to be that no more. I don't want to walk outside. And there's just so many differences now. And a lot of changes. And I really resonate with that. Like the fact that we've had to put on for each other and try to be, we're not doing it on purpose, but as humans, we do try to make things as best as they present as best as we can to keep the moments going. But is it something that you're like, okay, listen, I just want to kick my heels off. This is what happened. Because I got ready.
I think so. And I think, there's a part of me that wants to believe, it's kind of almost the like New Year's resolution mentality of like, once we exit the pandemic, everything is going to be different. The thing that I told my friend the other night was like, I was like, there's a part of me that's realizing that all of the problems that I've been able to pin on the pandemic for the past year, okay, now I have to kind of face that because I can't.
Girl, tell the truth, shame the devil.
It's been easy to be like, okay, this is what's causing my unhappiness. This is what's causing my stress. It's, and I've often tried to, eventually be more patient with myself and be like, you're living through a global pandemic. It's okay that you are feeling X, Y, Z. And I still think that's all completely true. But that being said, I'm like, we're reaching a point where I can no longer sort of blame any of my general malaise on this pandemic and then have to kind of face things that I've been able to look away from for the past year. So I think that that's another thing that I'm starting now to become, and I'm glad that that's the problem versus the just constant anxiety and dread about dying from this virus every day. Like, I'm glad to move on to like a more existential sort of question, but at the same time, it is a very real thing. And that's like, I was kind of joking as I said it to him, but I'm also like, no, but this is serious. Like I am, realizing like, okay, here I am. I'm still here with whatever problems are, vaccinated or not. I still have these things that I maybe have not wanted to face and probably will have to at some point.
Oh my gosh, so real. A few days ago, I said the same thing to myself. I said, all the things you said that like you were going to get done and the world was stopping you, or life or anxiety or whatever, are those things still a priority? And if so, are you okay with them happening in the unknown to whatever this next year, right? Like this is now this isn't the pandemic anxiety. Now this is just life again. We're back to life. And life is going to keep doing its thing. And I guess the hard part was to find out that it is a roller coaster all the time, pandemic or not, pain or not, loss or not, death or not, heartache, heartbreak. Life is going to keep being unknown. And I was like, oh, look at that. That's that's wild. I yelled at my therapist. I was like, I'm confused. I thought you were here to teach me about certainty. She's like, oh, we're opposite. It's the opposite. So it was a moment for sure. Yeah, I feel that. Wow. Well, I don't know what your friend's response was, but I'll definitely tell you that I am with you 100%. And I think a lot of us are. And I think sometimes we need to all remember that we're still unfolding, whether, however we go back to this life. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. But I know it took about 4 to 5 years from what I've heard for you to write the Vanishing half. What were some chapters specifically, or even some characters that you went through more than once? Like I'm sure there's knowing the town you were going to do it in, that felt clear, right? But maybe other things that you felt, okay, this took a lot more fine tuning.
Yeah. Honestly, most of the book, I think all I knew going into it was I knew the town where it was set. I knew there would be twins. I knew that they would live their lives on opposite sides of the color line. And that was kind of all I knew going into it. So from there, I originally thought the book would just be about those twin sisters. I didn't realize it was going to go into the next generation and their daughters. I didn't know it was going to go into the men in their lives. So the book just kind of kept expanding. I kept growing more interested in these other characters kind of swirling around these sisters. And then I would start kind of being like, oh, well, what's going on over here? What's happening with this person? What's their story? And then that kind of took me away from what I thought the trajectory of the book would be. So it was a lot. It was a lot of having to try to wrangle the book into something that felt coherent and understandable. The timeline of the book is non-chronological. So I didn't plan to do that. So I had to try to find some way that readers could just follow where you were in time. And yeah, I think a lot of it was just the book kept expanding in every way, both the amount of time that it takes, the different geographical locations, all the characters. It just continually kept expanding, kind of growing away from me. So I think so much of the revision process was like, okay, now I have all these like disparate pieces. How can I try to weave these together into something that makes like a complete picture?
How many times have you read the full thing?
I mean, do you mean by the full thing? Do you mean like the version that you read?
The version that, oh, dang, now I mean, yes, that is what I meant, but now I'm like, probably had so many versions. So yes,
yeah.
I read. Yeah.
Okay, the version that you read, probably at least maybe 3 or 4 times, because I like to like go back and read it out loud for one draft. I read the whole thing out loud. It takes forever, but I go through, I do that. And then you had copy edits and like all these different points along the editing process. So probably about 3 or 4 times the version that you saw. But yeah, of course, before then there was a million versions of trying to get it to that point.
What was the process of tuning your self-trust in writing that many versions, right? Because as a writer, a lot of it can be lonely. I'm not sure how many other people you allow to check out your writing during that time besides editors. So I'd love to know, like, how many people do you actually send drafts to that you fully trust and know your writing and know your voice enough? And then if not that many people, what was your personal self-trust process?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, this process was different than my first book because my first book I wrote while I was in school and I had it workshopped by like my classmates at Michigan. Right. So, I had 11 people reading it and giving me feedback. This was a much lonelier process because I was no longer in school at that point. But I do have 2 really close friends that I met at Michigan who read a draft of this book and gave me feedback on it. And I had my agent who read it, my editor read it, and they gave me feedback too. So I think a lot of it was learning how to trust myself, I think realizing that I had never done this before, I was kind of beating myself up over it because I was like, well, you've written a book already. Why is this so hard? And then my friend was like, well, you've never written a second book. So that's why it's hard. And that was true. I had never done that. So once I realized that this is a new thing, it's not what you have done before. Every book teaches you how to write it. And you have to kind of go through that process to learn. Once I realized that, I think then I was able to relax a little bit and kind of roll with the punches and continue on. But it was a pretty, the way I experienced it emotionally was pretty arduous. I was talking to my editor about it and she was like, I don't remember it being, a difficult process. And I was thinking like, well, yeah, because you were editing me.
Right, yeah, you're editing the versions. You weren't having to be there.
Yeah, like I'm sure it was lovely, but for me, it was not. I saw some of my old emails the other day where I was just like completely despairing by her edits. And I felt like I was never going to figure it out. And I was so down. And I remember being in that headspace of feeling like I was never going to get it together. So there were definitely some difficult moments with this book, but I'm glad that I stuck it out. I'm glad that I had, close friends and trusted colleagues who helped me shape this book and push it to where, to the version that you got to read today.
Yeah. To that point of that feeling of never feeling like it's going to be done, because I think a lot of us experience that in different things that we work on. Is there one piece of advice that you're like, this helped me get over the hump? Or is the truth just, hey, life will push you over the hump eventually, but we just got to go through the pain and the turmoil of what it is to be creative or to even create anything?
Yeah. I wish I had one piece of advice. I think each project is different. I think, for the Vanishing Half, I don't know what was the moment that things clicked. I remember for the mothers, it was, there was a character who was just kind of floating around the book who was pulling the book apart. And once I got rid of that one character, the book got tighter and it improved.
The character,
and that was
I'm gonna be like, dang, who was it? But
I know. There was so the main guy in the book, he had a brother, and the brother was kind of, instead of the book being centered around a love triangle, it was kind of a love like rectangle. Right. And there's a reason why you don't see love rectangles. They're not interesting. Love triangles are good because two people are fighting over one thing and one of them is not going to get what they want. And that's why we love a love triangle. But once I realized that, I kept fighting it.
Girl, but I feel you. I'm like, I hate, in real life, they are not.
They're bad in real life. They're great in fiction.
But watching it, you're like, oh my God, girl, pick him. No, pick him. Or
yes.
Yeah, no, you're right.
they're very useful in fiction. They're like obvious, but that's why they're obvious, is because they're useful. Right. So for me, once I figured that out, I was like, what if I got rid of this character and it became a triangle? And then the book just opened up. So that was like a moment of figuring that out. But that was like 7 years into writing it. And the Vanishing half, I don't remember that moment. I remember it being the type of thing where I was just working away. And I sent a draft to my agent and she was just like, oh my God, it's fixed. Like, you did it. And I didn't know really what I had done to kind of do it, but it really was just kind of trucking away at it and trying to make each draft a little better than the one before.
That's amazing. It's scary because, like, to her point of being like, you did it. And you're like, I did what? And
yes.
you sat there a long time and try to pick it apart. And I wonder if, a part of our journey is also feeling like, and I thought this in some of the characters too, going from right or wrong to right versus right to writer. Writer's not a word. I use it. Right to writer to writer to writer to even better versus critiquing ourselves as humans and saying like, that was wrong and now this is right.
Yes.
Do you see yourself having that same ideology when you're just evolving as a person or even as a writer, the wrong versus right? Or have you allowed yourself to go right to writer to writer?
Yeah, I definitely think that is a healthier and more productive way of thinking about it, and in life in general, but I think especially with writing, because there isn't really wrong in writing, it's not that what I was doing before was wrong. It just wasn't working in the way that it could have worked. But I think one of the things also that I feel like as I've grown from book to book that I've sort of brought into it is just the idea of, I used to sit down when I was revising and be like, okay, I have to change all of these things in the draft, and this is going to make it better, and this is going to fix the book once I sit down and change all of these things. And now every time I sit down, I'm just like, okay, if I can make it like 2% better than what it was, then that's a good draft. Like, it just has to be 2% better. I don't have to fix every problem. I just want to make it a tiny bit better than it was. And that to me has been much more helpful and better psychologically, but also better creatively than sort of trying to make yourself believe that you're going to wave a magic wand and fix because every time you make a choice in the book, it leads to another choice. If you have just sort of opened up a new path, which doesn't mean that you've fixed everything. You've just created a new set of possibilities for yourself, which are also could be really good possibilities or also less helpful possibilities. So I think that's been part of what I've tried to sort of embrace as I've moved on from book to book, is just, I'm not going to wave a magic wand and fix everything. I just need to set out to try to make it a little bit better than what it was.
Yo, we really have to internalize what you just said. Like, that's a good universal hug that we should really be giving each other, right? It doesn't go from this to let's say it doesn't go from 0 to 100. I know that, he told us it does not. Anyway. And so it's amazing to remember that going from 0 to 1, from 1 to 5, 5 to 6 is okay. I think that's really powerful, especially walking into this new year. Like I said, a part of my personal anxiety was, do we go back to like thinking this is productive? Because like, I can't go back. I really prefer not to. And so it's really good to hear that in your process as well. That's amazing. What have been some personal experiences with colorism or passing that you've had? Now, I want to ask if they affected some ways that you wrote some of the characters, but I first just want to know any stories that come to mind of just your experience with it overall.
Yeah, I think the passing piece of the book, a lot of that was thinking about, I remember watching the movie Imitation of Life with my mother when I was a kid. And that was really the first thing I ever saw on passing. I don't think I knew what passing was until I saw that movie. And I remember just being really confused by it because I didn't know that it was a thing that you could do or that you would want to do. Like, it hadn't really occurred to me at that point to really understand. Like, why would someone not want to be Black? Like, that was the thing I didn't really get. And I think that speaks to a lot of both when I grew up and also, how old was I?
Yeah.
I was in elementary school, I would say. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but maybe like 4th or 5th grade or something. So I think that speaks to kind of how I grew up and also when I grew up, to be fair. So I remember that kind of being my introduction to passing. And for colorism, like I don't remember learning about colorism. I just remember always picking up on these things, the sort of information that you receive as a child about, who's considered beautiful, who's desirable, who is considered, better. That was something that I just remember observing around me. I grew up in the 90s and, the beauty standard was like Halle Berry. Like that was, Tyra Banks. Like I was able to see that and be like, oh, this is who is considered beautiful. This is, and those, I don't remember ever like somebody telling me or explaining this to me, but I do remember just like picking up on those cues around me. I imagine, maybe not. I think maybe for kids, it's maybe a little bit different with at least the internet and social media and being able to see lots of different bodies. But not to sound like an elder millennial, but like, yeah, back in my day, it was just mass media. We didn't have, it was just mass media and that just meant basically who white America deemed acceptable. And that was basically just, very sort of light-skinned Black women who seeing who's in music videos and who gets to be the love interest in the music video versus who's the girl who's just like, naked dancing. That was also like a racial, or not a racial, but sort of a colorist kind of spectrum. So I remember sort of picking up on a lot of those things as a kid and sort of piecing together this hierarchy and realizing how charged it was emotionally. And I think that was one of the things that I was thinking about as I was working on this book was how do I write about color in a way that's not purely ideological or intellectual and write about it in a way that speaks to the emotional charge of experiences with color.
Oof. And that emotion can vary from so many different places, things, and highs and lows, and especially watching how each character really, I don't want to say performs in that case, because it really was emotional. And you see a lot of, especially Adele, I just had so much, I had so much love for her, but I was mad at her too, because the parent plays a huge role, right? And then you hear why and how she tried to love, and you see her flaw, see where she tried. You're like, but you missed the mark. I don't get it. So it's like so interesting. I was having a really amazing conversation with my sister about representation. Actually would love to get your perspective on it. Did you feel like you grew up with representation first in film or movies or television and then in writing?
That's interesting. I guess it's hard because I only have, the only experience I have is what I grew up with. And again, I don't know what it's like for kids growing up now and what they are seeing and experiencing. I remember these, moments of seeing Black girls and Black women. I was talking on Twitter the other day about cartoon characters, and I remembered Susie Carmichael from the Rugrats. It's the type of thing where there was a way in which I maybe felt represented by someone like her because she was a Black girl, she had braids, but also she was so she was the most competent character. She had everything together. And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm not that. I'm more the anxious Chucky Finster, who's the little redheaded boy who's full of anxiety. I felt like I had more in common with Kev, although I looked, of course, like Susie. I just knew that I was not competent and cool like Susie. So I feel like there were these moments of seeing these characters. And I remember, seeing these Black and brown characters in media, watching, all the shows on all the Black shows that came on UPN.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what yes, I love that.
That was a heyday. Yes. I remember that.
Yeah.
My parents would always have us watching, all the Black documentaries and the Black made for TV movies about the civil rights movement. We would watch all those things. So they were definitely, I think I felt I felt represented, I think, in a way, or I knew where to find it, I guess. Like, it wasn't that it was everywhere, but I knew like which shows had Black characters or where I could see Black people. And I was like tuned into those things. And I think it's similar with books. You know, I felt like we basically never read Black people in school, but my parents had, you know, bookshelves full of Black writers. And that was where I read, you know, I don't remember reading really any Black text beyond like maybe A Raisin in the Sun. Like, I don't even think we read Beloved when I was in school, you know? So it, you know, if it had been up to that, I would have never had read Black people, but it was, you know, my parents. And when I would go to the library, I would check out books about Black people. So I think in a sense, I felt represented. I knew where to find the representation if it was not readily available to me. But then I suppose maybe if you have to like treasure hunt to seek it out, then that's a sign that you aren't. So I think a lot of my experience has been both knowing where to find it and also seeing myself or writing myself into spaces where I was not allowed to be. And I think that that's also, you know, an experience, I think, of being marginalized in some way, of being able to try to like identify across difference because you kind of have to, you know, in a way. So I think that's a long, messy way of answering your question, I suppose.
No, but it's a truth, and it is a messy truth, because there are people who say that they didn't have representation in the same, let's say we're both 30, we're both born in the 1990s or 1990. And so I loved every UPN show. Like I watched, oh my God, One-on-One heavily. That was my jam,
Loved
right?
it.
There's somebody else who's like, actually, I never saw that show. And they were born the same time as me. And I'll bring up my sister's perspective was that she thought maybe it was a class thing, or maybe it was just like how you were raised, what's the parenting, what's important for you to see. And I thought that was so interesting because there are so many discussions of representation now. And you wonder, like, is a decision of representation based on who's producing shows, or is it the home and how you were raised and what was important in that home, which, you know, is why reading this book, I was like, really, where you're raised, it just has a lot to do with what you think. And it won't ever, I wonder, do you think it ever goes away? If that's rooted, do you get to leave it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that was one of the questions that I wanted to think about, because in the case of somebody like Jude, I think when I first started working on her story, I thought that most of the story would be based on her growing up in Mallard, and quickly realized that that was both like just really excruciating to write and also excruciating to read. Because you know from the opening of the book that life is going to be bad for her there. So I had to ask myself, like, to what end am I just showing the kind of endless pain of her living in this place? And later realized it was more interesting to watch what happened when she physically leaves this place behind, but still kind of carries that town with her on the inside. And to me, you know, I think a lot of her journey is about trying to figure out, is there a way to like divorce those things? And I think that's something that we often are all thinking about, like carrying with you for good or for bad. You know, there's a lot I think that was good about the way that I was raised, and, you know, my parents, you know, the fact that, like I said, I found passing to be unthinkable. I mean, I think that's kind of a testament to how my parents raised me. And I'm grateful for that. But there are a lot of things that we kind of, you know, take with us from where we grew up or how we were raised. And sometimes these things that we want to leave behind, and we find it difficult to leave behind because there's some way that it kind of embeds itself in us, and perhaps it becomes something that we then pass on to somebody else. So that, I think, is one of the trickiest things. It's like, what do we do with, you know, the stuff that we inherit, or that we, you know, that we sort of, that becomes part of us because of how we're raised? What do we do with it once we have left that home behind?
I'm leaving a moment of silence because I have no idea. Like, it's like, what do we do? What do you do with it? How do you relate to other people? You know, because it's, if we have that experience, then the person you meet in any room is also having that experience. And it's two people trying to figure out what experience matters in this moment, right? Like, what do I bring from wherever I came from, how I was raised, what I was praised for, what I was clapped for, to this space. And I have a huge compassion for us in this moment, trying to relearn and unlearn some things. And so that, to me, I think this book is really powerful in that space. And I want to, you know, kind of wrap with asking, what has the audience been like for you? Has it been a lot more, or I guess, what have the readers been like? Has it been young? Has it been older? Has it been Black? Has it been white? Because I saw a post that you did about how some white people have reacted to Black books, books written by Black people in the past year. And they've said, okay, we found the book and this is going to be our saving grace. It's going to be our thing. And then they don't really read it. And that's how I feel when I went to see, oh gosh, it's slipping my mind right now. Oh, Detroit. When I saw Detroit, I was highly upset because it was a really excruciating, wonderful film that Black people already knew the pain of. And when I looked around and didn't see white people in the theater, I was upset. I was like, I don't need this information today. I need you to read it, And so when I saw that post that you did, I was like, wow, I really resonated with that. And I wonder, how have you been experiencing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the audience has been, I think as broad as I can imagine. I guess mostly women, I will say. I don't know that it's hard because I haven't had like an event, so I can't be like, this is who came. But as far as from social media and the people who talk to me, it's mostly been women, which was true of my first book. But I think, it's been people, lots of different racial groups, a lot of like, when the book first came out, the average person tagging me on Instagram was probably like a 30 to 40-year-old white lady. And that was probably the average person coming to it. And I think what was difficult, what I tell people is that my book came out the same day that people were posting Black squares on Instagram. It was like such a specific moment and where we were. And
June 2nd, I remember that day.
Yes.
Yes. Fuck me. Woo, that was a day, girl.
It was a day.
Oh my God, Brit.
Yes, it was a day. Yes, I remember it well. But that was the day the book came out. So there was such like sort of intense, intensity of emotion that everybody's feeling, and social media stuff was intense. And there were a lot of, halfway through that day, the kind of conversation went from like the Black squares to like, let's support Black artists. And then there would be people tagging me in that of like, oh, this book just came out today. Let's support, this person. Of course, I'm happy to see the support. But there were also a lot of people that there was kind of a tone of either self-congratulation or just this, the one that always got me was people who were like, I haven't read I have to admit, I haven't read a Black book in, 5 years, but I bought this one. And, and my feeling is just like, whatever brings you to the book is fine. I'm happy that you bought it, but also like, maybe don't tell me that you haven't, I don't think I need, like, I don't really need to know that you don't read Black people, but you made an exception for me because, gesturing vaguely to the country being on fire. So, I think that
with that, like, what am I supposed to feel after that?
Yes. Yeah. I felt that of kind of like, I don't know what you want from me in that moment. And, I knew, but again, like it's, what you're saying with the movie that you saw, it's the type of thing. And I think the experience that I have often as a Black person who is frequently in spaces with lots of white people, which is that feeling of like, they're talking about you, but they're not talking to you. And the idea of you tagging me in that post, that's not for me. That's because you are performing for your white followers and friends and demonstrating to them that you are a good white person because you bought this Black book. It has nothing to do with me, So it was the type of thing, I think realizing it made it a little bit more frustrating, but also allowed me to truly like wash my hands of it and not feel emotionally anything about it, because I realized, they're not talking to me. They're not talking to other Black people. They're talking to white people. And the book is like a conduit for that. And there's something strange to think about that, to have spent 4 or 5 years writing a book and then it comes out and suddenly it becomes a symbol of something that's, completely different or something that you didn't imagine in that way. And, I think at the end of the day, I was glad to see people turn to books because there could have been so many other things that people rallied around in that moment. The idea that everyone was turning to books for some reason, I think was just cool in a year that, bookstores were struggling and writers were not going on tour. All of that I think was good, but I did feel ambivalent about it. And I still do, of that kind of feeling of the book becoming representative of white people wanting to impress other white people by their sort of social awareness, because that's not why I write. I don't write so that white people can feel good. I don't write so that white people can convince each other that they are good. I write because I want to tell interesting stories. I hope that whoever from whatever racial group or other ethnicity just enjoys them as stories.
So when will it feel less performative for you to actually join the conversation? I love that note of they're not talking to me, they're talking about this, but they're not actually talking to me. So will there be something that you hear and you're like, oh, I can tell you're talking to me now and you want to be a part of the conversation? Or are you truly, do you feel better to just be kind of out of it? You know, the work is here, but you're not here.
Yeah, I mean,
I get that. That's self-care. What you just said is self-care on a high level, because I
mean, honestly, I've just disengaged, I think, because what I tell people often, like, there are people who are interested, there are Black people or people of color who are interested in educating white people, and they are both qualified to do that work and hopefully compensated to do that work. And I will direct you to any number of them as far as who you should go to learn. But, you know, I've been asked in these events of, you know, well, you know, what do you have to tell white people, or what do you want white people to take away from this? And it's just like, to me, this was always a book that was about conversations between and among Black people. You know, colorism is a topic for Black people and about us. So that to me was never one that included white people, really. And I never thought of this book as really being about white people that much. So I think for me, a lot of it has been kind of disengaging. And, you know, what I ultimately hope for is I hope that white people, when they're talking to each other, like, talk to each other and kind of leave me out of it. Because I remember my friend was telling me about, he had a friend who is white and who put all of his white friends on like a close friends list on Instagram. And when he said that, I was like, hey, why did he do that? And my friend was like, well, that's where he shares like all of his anti-racist resources, so that his Black friends or whoever, they don't have to, like, when they're scrolling Instagram, it's not for them to learn, right? So they don't really have to see it. They don't have to engage with it. They don't have to kind of watch him undergo this public education that a lot of white people are very painstakingly undergoing now in public. Instead of making his friends of color see that, he puts it so that all his white friends see it and only his white friends see it. And I was like, yeah, I actually think that's kind of clever. Like, you know, that's who the resources are for. So I think that's kind of my feeling, is I've ultimately sort of disengaged. And, you know, and like I said, I'm happy for whoever comes to the book, but I always tell people that I'm not qualified or interested in teaching. And I don't think that that's what fiction is best at, is teaching us. I think that fiction is about exploring lives other than our own. And if we learn something from those lives, that's great, but they're not, you know, they're not sort of how to be a good person type of books. And I think reading in that way does a disservice to yourself, the reader, but also to the book that you're reading.
And adds a distance to it, because you're not supposed to, but there's an enjoying factor of someone's life and story versus I'm going to take this and now figure out how to make it a thing that I now know and know how to do in front of other people.
Yes.
Back to the performance.
Exactly. It does. It centers you in this strange way of kind of taking other people's lives and boiling them down to like parables. And there's something, I think, kind of dehumanizing about that, to kind of iron out the complexity of a life and simplify it in the way that it only exists to teach you something. I think that, you know, often you see that happening in lots of different, you know, communities. I think particularly when you think about ability, like the way that that people who are able-bodied are often looking at people who are disabled as inspirational, or this is what this person is teaching us about how to persevere, or, you know, this type of really ableist language that pops up of taking a life that is interesting and complex on its own and just boiling it down to what it stands to teach you. So I think that's something I think a lot of, you know, readers don't realize that they're doing that, but I think it's something that I also increasingly tried to be mindful of when I'm reading characters who are really different from me in some way, of not centering myself in that story and instead enjoying my time, you know, experiencing these other lives.
Wow. I think a lot of the reason we do that first is the conditioning of thinking, like the conditioning and programming of this person's different, right? The word different that we continuously use and then somehow praise and then take it. It's weird, but then also not feeling enough by knowing what we know and always feeling bad and not like a good person, to your point. And because I'm hearing that, I'm like, even as an able-bodied person, when you watch somebody else's story who's not able-bodied, or or you're listening to somebody who is hard of hearing or whatever, and you're like, oh, I'm now taking their, I can have a conversation with them versus like, I get to admire their world. And it's, wow, I'm really sitting with that because part of me just feels like we all think we're going to be better people for doing that and finding out like none of us are. And that's hard. Like I'm like, what do we do with that? That is, I hope.
Yeah. I mean, it's uncomfortable. I do think it's uncomfortable. But, you know, like I was reading the book Detransition Baby by Tori Peters the other day, which is a really fun and repulsive read. It involves a transgender woman at the center of it. It's transgender community in New York. And, you know, as a cis person, I'm like, I kept having to check myself for moments in which I was centering my own experiences as I was kind of allowed. The book allows you to, you know, experience a community that you may not be a part of as a cisgender person or someone who's not based in New York or whatever way in which you're different from these characters. But like, that is the enjoyment of the book. Like, it's not about me centering myself and my experiences and my thoughts on gender and my experiences of gender. Although it did prompt me to reconsider and think about what does it mean to be a woman? How have I constructed my own gender identity? And the way that as a cisgender person, I rarely, if ever, think about, you know, like that was, I think, the most disorienting experience of reading that book, of being like, oh, let me now pause and think about how I have constructed my identity, because I have done so as consciously as this character who's a transgender woman, but I've never had to think about it because of my, you know, privilege as a cisgender person. So I did have that experience in reading it, but ultimately I, you know, to me, I was like, I had to keep checking myself of like, this isn't about you. This is, you're reading about particular and specific lives in a very particular and specific situation in this book, and also a writer who's writing masterfully with a really propulsive and exciting voice. And to center my own experience, or like that the importance of this book is that it taught me about gender. Like, no, that's not the experience of it. The book is just like funny and good, you know? So I don't mean to be on a high horse about it. I just think that to me, it's something that I try to continue to remind myself of, just how can I read more insightfully and read more critically, I think, is something that I continually ask myself. And that's not always about, you know, let me read, you know, books that are going to be really challenging and dense. It's just, how can I become the best version of a reader that I want to be? I think that that's something that I would love to see us have conversations about, that of just like, how can we read well and not just, you know, are you reading these books that people say are good? That matters so much less than I think being a critical and intelligent reader.
Girl, I'm checking myself as you're saying that. Like, I'm some discomfort because I'm like, wait, this is real. I think we are holding on to our worthiness any way we can, right? And we're always uncomfortable. And so we're always looking for the common thing that makes us a better person. And so for you to say that, it really, I hope it jolts other people as much as it just jolted me, because that's a moment I'm like, okay, what am I currently reading? Am I reading it for any other reason than to enjoy and be delighted by this story versus how can I, like, wow, I'm really sitting with that. So do you feel like there's a common thread with all stories, or do you genuinely feel like, no, there doesn't always have to be?
I mean, I don't think there always has to be, but I think, you know, I think there's another thing. When I was teaching, I would teach this essay called The Banality of Empathy. And it's by Namwali Serpell, who's a really great novelist. And she I would teach it to my writing students because she sort of picks apart this idea that the reason why it is good to write or read is because it allows you to like walk in someone else's shoes. And that's something that we always say and think, and I think to some degree believe as writers and readers.
Right.
Yeah, but she talks about the way that can be a very selfish endeavor, because the idea of you still inserting yourself in that other person's shoes instead of merely kind of experiencing what their world is. Like, there's still a way that there's something very self-interested about that kind of positionality of this is the value of books, you know? So it's a really challenging and interesting essay that I love to assign to my students and I love to revisit, but it's something that I think challenges me too of, you know, because I think the act of writing fiction is a very presumptuous act of saying that I'm going to write from the perspective of people outside of myself. I think there is something that's very presumptuous about it, but that kind of question of, am I just putting myself, you know, Brit, this is who I would be if I were in this situation? or am I experiencing what that character is experiencing in that situation? And I think there's a slight difference between those two things, but I think it's an important difference and what we as the reader bring to books.
Another moment of silence, y'all. I'm like, okay, I need to go back through my reading list and just making sure I am not doing the selfish thing. That is really okay. Sorry, guys, I'm a little stunned. That is, it's just a truthful, it's just we got to be willing to pull the Band-Aid and unlearn some things and remind ourselves that our third grade teacher who told us to walk in someone's shoes, it's okay, that's not true anymore. We actually should walk in our shoes, own and respect and love and honor the shoes we're in, while we own, respect, and honor the shoes of the people next to us.
Yes.
That we can walk away with. I love that. Okay, I will lastly ask you, how can we read well then, Brit?
I mean, I think, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think for one, I think it means reading what you want to read. And that's something that I miss from being a kid, I think, where I read so widely when I was a kid. I read everything. I read, mystery, science fiction, all these different genres. I had no snobbery about me when I was a kid, because you're not a snob when you're a child. And I miss that, because now I do, find myself is this a good book? What were the reviews? What do my friends think of it? I find myself asking those questions. So this is for me saying to myself as well, which is just reading widely and reading what you want to read. And I think also just reading in a way that I think that's critical and thoughtful and engaging. I love hearing from readers who have intelligent things to say about the book, even if it's different than what I intended as the writer, or if they read it in a way that I was not expecting them to read it. I love hearing readers who have an interesting insight on the book, or they bring something to the book in some way that's different than what I imagined. So I think all of those things I think are important to reading well. But I think my favorite readers to meet really are the people who say, I haven't read a book for fun in years, or I haven't read a book for fun since I was in school, but I read your book. Or the pandemic version was, I have not read since the lockdown and I read your book. And I love those readers in a way even more than the people who are voracious readers, because it means a lot to me that this is someone who maybe reading does not always come naturally to, or they don't always love reading, but they still loved my book in spite of it. They wanted to read it in spite of it. So I think those are the big things, reading widely, reading what is exciting to you. I wholeheartedly believe in quitting books when you don't like them. I know some people are completists where they have to. Right. No, I don't believe in that. Life's too short. I'm just if it's not for you, it's just not for you. And sometimes it'll find you at a different point in your life. There are books that I felt like I couldn't get through, and then years later I picked them up and it was the book met me at the right moment. So I think being open to those types of those moments of serendipity in your reading life, I think also are very important.
Is there any fear with, if you read what you love all the time, that you miss out on other things, specifically white people? Oh, I mean, not just white people. I mean, even Black people reading something you love all the time and it has the same type of, theme. Yes. And you don't expand to a certain, is that?
I think a bit. I mean, I'm torn to answer this, because there's a part of me that's again, life's too short. Read, if all you want to read is romance, then read romance. Why, if all you want to read is sci-fi, read sci-fi. There's a part of me that feels that way. Life's too short. But there's also a part of me that you don't know sometimes what you'll like until you experience it. And you may think, I don't like books about X, but then you read that one book and it opens something for you. So I would say maybe honoring what you enjoy, but also keeping an open mind to what you may enjoy that you haven't yet discovered.
Now that's the beauty of nuance, people. That's really what it is. Brit, thank you so much. This was incredible to really be able to dive in, not only with the book, but just past the book and some of your personal perspectives in coming to this work and this piece. So thank you so much for sharing yourself with me and sharing space with me for this show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And a huge congratulations on your HBO deal. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of exciting things coming. I know that's a process, so I don't think there's a lot you can share, but if there is, feel free to put it out.
Yeah, thank you. No, we're still so early in the process, so nothing crazy has happened yet. But it's exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the writers come up with.
Yeah. And remember, you've never been an executive producer before either. So there's
That's also true.
Grace there. For
yes. Thank you. I appreciate it. I need it.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you guys for watching.
Thanks for watching Human to Human. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, leave a comment. And while you're at it, share this with someone you love or just someone you like, as long as you share it. Stay connected between episodes on Instagram at Human to Human with Stacy Ike. Let's be curious. Let's be in community.